I think when I meet Ezekiel and Daniel in heaven one day, Ezekiel is what we did last week. I think it's going to be an awkward meeting, right? They are both contemporaries, so like on the prophet, like importance in the Bible level, they're really close. Ezekiel was 48 chapters long, and we did that in one shot, right? And so when I meet them, Ezekiel might say, "Oh, Gene, I heard that you did this Bible series. That's wonderful. You went through the entire Bible. Hey, I wrote a book, right? Like, how'd you do it?" And I'll be like, "Well, we did we took a high-level view, so we kind of did your whole book in one shot." And he'll be like, "Oh, okay. That seems a little brief for someone as important as me, Ezekiel, right?" And then Daniel might ask that question as well. And he's like, "Well, my book was only 12 chapters long, so you probably did one shot too, right?" And I'll have to say like, "Well, but Daniel, yeah, we did it in 8 sessions." And that'll get weird because Ezekiel will look at me and like, 12 chapters, 8 sessions. What happened to the high-level view? And I don't have any explanation for that other than, Ezekiel, you're like super weird, but I'm not going to say that because that would be rude, right? But yeah, we're going to be in Daniel for like the entire summer, well, most of the summer, 8 sessions, right? Where Ezekiel only got 1, so I apologize in advance. But that's just the way it is. And a lot of it is that Ezekiel's themes were kind of covered in also and Jeremiah, and you saw it in Isaiah. And then Daniel is just a little bit different. So Daniel, we're going to be more, it's going to be more of a deep dive. We could also do Daniel in many, many sessions, but we're going to spend 8 sessions on it. And so, yeah, let's jump in, okay? This is how we're going to do it, right? It's 8 sessions. We're only doing chapter 1 today, right? So it's like, that's why I read the whole thing. It's like, what? It's like just one chapter. Here's a very quick introduction to the book of Daniel, and then we're going to jump into chapter 1. Right? So Daniel, the author is Daniel, just like Ezekiel, the author was Ezekiel. And like Ezekiel, Daniel's audience is that first group of Israelite exiles that were taken from Judah into Babylon the first time before the Judah and Jerusalem falls, right? So with Jeremiah, at the end of Jeremiah, the entire city falls, and it's like, oh, Israel is no more. That's the kind of situation. Here, Israel's still doing their thing, right? Now they're under Babylonian control, but they're still there. The temple's still there, and then Daniel is now in Babylon, like Ezekiel was. They were that first group of exiles. And the central theme in Daniel is basically God's sovereignty despite like ... and fill in the blank, right? So for Daniel's, what they're experiencing, right? Despite exile, right? Like despite the fact that it seems that Babylon is in control, God is still sovereign. So that's a central theme throughout the entire book. Okay, so let's jump into chapter 1, which is what you just heard during the scripture reading time. Okay, so Nebuchadnezzar conquers Jerusalem and basically makes Israel a vassal state. Right, this happens around 597 BC, and it's about 10 years later is when the temple will fall. Right, so we're in this period of time where there's kind of 2 groups of Israelites. Right. And he takes treasure from the temple and brings it to Babylon, and then forcibly recruits talented young men from the royal family and from the officials and nobility into his service. Okay, and so these, it's like a quote, recruits, right? There's not like a situation that are like, oh, hey, you had a great SAT score. Would you like to come to Babylon with me? It's more, we just defeated your entire country. We may have killed your parents. And now, because you're super talented, yeah, you're coming with us, right? So it's kind of it's a little bit weird, right, for those people. And they're probably mostly actually probably all, teenagers to young adults, right? So Daniel and his friends, they're in that like, probably 13 is the youngest he might have been, to, like maybe 20, maybe early 20s, but in that range. And you have Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are among this group, right? So, but they're not the only four. This is like, there's a lot of them, right? And this is not just from Israel. Remember, Babylon has conquered all sorts of countries and nations and groups. So there's just this group of young men who are being trained. There's a wide variety of them. Now, the interesting thing here, Daniel is the Jewish name Daniel, right? But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's the name we know of. That's actually their Babylonian names, right? And so Daniel kind of tells you their Jewish name, but then kind of switches over to their Babylonian names, right? And so to serve Nebuchadnezzar, you kind of need to be like elite, right? You got to be like the best in everything, right? They're looking for the really talented people. And even after they are captured and kind of put into this training school, it's done for 3 years before they start their service, right? And so they're still in their teens or maybe young adults by the time they start serving Nebuchadnezzar, right? And it's funny, when I was reading this and I was thinking, in our predominantly Asian American context, I wonder if some of these young people are like, wait a minute. You're saying if I were in their shoes, I could basically like go to Harvard, have it all paid for, but I'm just kind of enslaved a little bit? And I know some of you are thinking like, maybe that's not a horrible trade-off, right? No, it is a bad trade-off, okay? But that's basically it, right? They are taking the best of the best, sticking them into like the best of the best in the world. Like Babylon is like the greatest power in the world at the time, or one of them, and into their best training programs to get these young men to be basically like the officials and the wise men serving Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so just think about that. Like that's the kind of situation they're in. Okay, now while in training, Daniel still wants to follow God. Right? And so in verse 8 it says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way." It would have been a lot easier just to kind of go along with it. First of all, the Babylonians have kind of like wiped out and defeated your entire country, so it's like, I guess it's just kind of do what they say, right? So for safety reasons, Daniel may have been better off just to kind of go along with it. Because remember, he's competing with all these other young men for the various spots to serve Nebuchadnezzar. Right? He could have just simply gone along with it. And also, for Daniel's perspective, and a lot of the Israelite captives' perspective, like their worldview back then was a lot of times like, okay, there's God, there's other gods, and they kind of like do this stuff, and like, well, somebody's got to be strong, right? And so it appears that God has been defeated by the Babylonian gods, right? If Babylon can come in and take over, so maybe the Babylonian gods are stronger, right? That's a thought that's got to be going through their heads as they go to Babylon and see like how incredible the city is and their technology and that kind of stuff. They might think, it's like, well, if we who have served the Lord have been defeated, and look at this place, right? It's like, well, maybe the Babylonian gods are actually the ones that are stronger. Maybe we should just kind of serve those gods, right? Daniel could have easily had that perspective as well. And likely the majority of all the other captives in it are just falling in line, right? Because, hey, you're trying to get these positions that they're training you for. If you're going to be rocking the boat, causing a problem, like, it's not good for your career, And so Daniel's not like that. Daniel still wants to honor and bless the Lord. He still wants to honor the Lord, and so God honors Daniel and blesses that decision. In verse 9 it says, "Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel." Right? So this is God doing this now. Right? And so God sees Daniel and says, wow, this is this is Daniel, right? He wants to be faithful even though everything seems to be falling apart for him. And God honors that and shows and changes the official's heart to kind of show favor to Daniel. But it's not that simple, right? Because this official is in charge of training all the young men, and if he does a bad job, well, it's his head, right? And so he also is like, hey, Daniel, like, I really like you. I think you have a lot of talent, but this thing you're asking, right? If I allow it and then you don't look as great, things don't go well, like this is like this is when I have my annual performance review, it's not going to go well, and then they're just going to kill me, right? And so the official's like, hey, I like you, but like I can't do this, right? And now what Daniel does is really interesting and wise. He acknowledges the official's concern and asks to be tested so it can really kind of go back into God's hand, right? In verse 12 to 15, it says, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants according with what you see. So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the men who ate the royal food. Now, it's really important here because I think a lot of Christians kind of get this mixed up. The application in this section is not promoting a vegetarian diet or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with the vegetarian diet, but that is not what we're supposed to get out of this, okay? This is God's doing, right? Because I've heard it taught when I was younger. It was like, oh yeah, it's because, the royal food is just, it's like really sweet and fatty, right? And it's like, that's not good for you. And they're probably drinking a lot of wine. That's not good for you either. And Daniel is really smart. He's eating healthy. Now, that is not, think about this, right? This is like the elite training center for a major world power. They know what they're doing. They're not going to just be like, hey, boys, you're the best of the best. Yeah, just eat whatever you want. Dessert all the time, more bacon for everybody. That's not what's going on. It's going to be very carefully monitored, right? So they can have the best result, because they don't, the King Nebuchadnezzar doesn't care about the happiness of these captives. No, they want them to be the best to serve him, right? And so this situation here is not an issue of God gave Daniel wisdom with the diet, and he's like, oh, I'm just going to eat vegetables. That's healthy. I was like, this is not a balanced diet that Daniel is eating, right? This is God showing his sovereignty here. It's like, hey, you can just eat vegetables and water and drink water, and then you will look better. That's not the diet. That is God doing this, okay? And so I just want to point that out there, because I know when I was younger, I feel like that was kind of the message I got a little bit, right? But the other thing we learned from this situation is this. Being faithful and standing for your faith doesn't mean being a jerk about it, right? Right now, we are in a Christian environment that there are not all Christians, but there are pockets of Christians and Christian leaders who kind of have they kind of take a tough guy, never back down mentality with being a Christian, right? So they take a real confrontational mentality of oh, we're Christians and we're right because we have God on our side, and everybody else who's not a Christian, you're terrible, you're all going to hell, right? And you may sit there and think well, that's rude. Yes, it is, right? But unfortunately, that there is pockets of Christians who are kind of living and promoting that kind of faith, and it is promoted from leadership in different pockets as well. And so what we see here is that is not how Daniel does it, right? Daniel takes a real a tactful way where he acknowledges, right? He acknowledges that the concerns of the official, and he really negotiates with him, right? And so standing for your faith doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about the truth, and anybody who doesn't have the truth is like that. Because here's the thing, though, right? Non-Christians are not our enemies. right? I think that's one of the problems. I think we live in a world now where Christians sometimes think, oh, the world, they're our enemy. No. Satan is our enemy, but non-Christians are not, I mean, think about how Daniel is treating these officials. The Babylonians are literally Daniel's enemy. The Babylonians literally came to his country, defeated them, possibly killed Daniel's family, or at least people he knew, dragged him off to Babylon, and yet Daniel treats them with respect, and he talks with them with tact, right? Daniel's a POW, and yet he doesn't act like, oh, they're the enemy, even though they kind of literally are. And we see this throughout the book of Daniel, not just in chapter 1, but Daniel serves the Babylonians and then later the Persians with a lot of wisdom. He does it faithfully, right? That's important to know, because a lot of times we just kind of switch our brains a little bit, and then we kind of think, oh, Daniel is helping these kings out, and they're like, yeah, I guess they're pretty good, right? No, this is not a good empire here, right? But Daniel, living faithfully for the Lord, it doesn't mean that he's just a jerk to other people, right? He does it faithfully, so that's important to remember. And again, God honors and blesses Daniel and his friends, because his friends are doing the same thing, right? And in verse 17 and 20, it says, to these four young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the enchanters in his whole kingdom. So God, this knowledge that they gained is from the Lord. That's important to understand, right? Yes, they were trained to be really smart. They're in the best, schools and training programs. But remember, there are tons of other young men who are there too, right? But God honors their faithfulness and gives them wisdom and knowledge that's kind of beyond what they're capable of, and the king notices, right? Remember, they're entering the king's service at late teenage stage or early young adult. They're not people who have tons of experience and to go off of, right? They're still really young, and they are clearly head and shoulders above, and that's God doing that. That is not their own natural ability. That's God doing that, right? And so for us today, right, it comes in a form of a question, right? And the question is this, and this will be quick, right? It's simply this: will you be faithful in times of despair? Will you be faithful in times of despair? Right? We often look at this question and we kind of look at it from the perspective of big catastrophes, right? Because we're thinking, well, Daniel, he was faithful, but he had to experience war and being captured and being enslaved, right? We're thinking about it that way. We're thinking, oh man, faithful in times of despair, yeah, that's Daniel, and I've got to be called to that. And so, one day when I am a prisoner of war, I think I might have the opportunity to be faithful, right? But that's not how it works, right? Hopefully we won't experience that. But you can be faithful in despair in everyday stresses and battles. It doesn't have to be something catastrophic, but every day you're going to experience things that are stressful, that are little battles. And the question is, will you be faithful in those, right? Will you be faithful in your attitude despite a crummy job or school situation, right? You may have a job where the work environment is toxic, or you may go to school and there are teachers and peers who are just, not your favorite, right? And you can't escape it because you got to go to school, you got to go to work, right? And every day, that's your little battles. Will you be faithful in your attitude toward them and your attitude towards, your work or your school, wherever you're at, despite those situations that are tough, right? That might be like the battle you're facing, right? Will you be faithful in how generous you are and how you give with your money, despite rising costs in an uncertain economy, right? We live in a world right now where, man, things are just I definitely feel for young adults who are starting their careers, right? You have war, you have the Strait of Hormuz doing all sorts of crazy stuff. You've got AI who's about to take away all our jobs or whatever. It is accelerating fast, right? There was a recent report that this Ukrainian general gave, and he just kind of mentioned, it's like, oh yeah, a couple years ago we tested out fully autonomous lethal drones, and we're like, what? That's like Terminator 2 stuff, right? That's the kind of stuff we were talking like, hey, we really got to think through this. Like, are we really going to allow AI-powered military things to actually make the final decision on who to kill without a human operator there? And we're like, oh, we really got to think about it. And this Ukrainian general or somebody was just like, oh yeah, we did that a couple years ago. And we're like, what, right? And now it's like, it's nuts. There's this video of a Chinese AI robotics company that's like basically advertising pre-orders for their AI humanoid robots, and it's all done in like this dark, I don't know, but anyways, they showed pictures of it, and it's like, that looks really real, right? And so hey, I get it. We live in really uncertain times, and but are we going to be faithful? Are you going to be faithful in how you give, right? Or are you going to say, you know what, God, I'm just gonna I've got to be a good steward of my resource. I'm just gonna hold on to it until things settle down, and then I will see what I can do, right? Or are we going to say, God, this is a crazy world, but you have called me to be generous, right? And when God calls to be generous, it's not generous just to be like, oh, that was nice. It's actually generous to the point where it affects you, right? It's like giving till it hurts. That is like, oh, there's a big difference between I have this incredible career and therefore I can give a lot, but I definitely have a lot of saved up, especially since, I also have 10,000 shares of SpaceX, so I'm okay, right? But I'll give this money. Versus I'm gonna give, and that actually puts a significant dent in my potential financial future, but that's my faithfulness, right? And so are we going to be faithful there, right? Are we going to be faithful in taking our Sabbath rest when we have a really busy schedule, right? Right, because things are crazy, got a lot to do, and the logical and efficient thing to do is say, hey, it's Sunday. This is a great time to catch up on studying, catch up on work because I've got this test, I've got this whatever going on. Sunday is the perfect time, right? After church, I'm gonna take a little break, but then I'm gonna get some work done before Monday starts. Or are we gonna be faithful there and say, God, I'm gonna rest because you commanded Sabbath, and yeah, I'm not sure how I'm gonna get this stuff done, but we're gonna be faithful in that. Are we going to be faithful in worship when we just don't feel very worshipful, right? All the stuff that's happening in our lives that we come in and we're just like, man, things are not going well, or I've got all this fear and stress, anxiety of stuff that's around, and when you come into church and you're like, okay, I'm going to stand here and I might move my lips a little bit, and sound will come out. I don't even know what's going on up there, but or are we going to come in and say, you know what, Lord, I'm going to be faithful in my worship of you, and I'm going to actually focus and give my heart in this worship despite all the other stuff that's happening, right? And so this idea of will I be faithful in times of despair, it doesn't have to be life or death, right? Where you're thinking, oh my goodness, like everything's going wrong, and like we're being invaded or something. Like it could be those everyday little stresses, everyday battles in your life, right? Will you be faithful in times of despair? And so the second one, this is tied to, and this will be it, is this: will you allow God to show his sovereignty in your life? And I know some of you might be thinking, whoa, God is sovereign. He doesn't need our permission and that kind of stuff. God is sovereign. Yeah, that's definitely true. But what I mean is this. God responded to Daniel and his friend's faithfulness with gifts of knowledge, wisdom, and for David, even the ability to interpret dreams, right? So like God honors their faithfulness and shows up big in their life, and that's showing God's sovereignty, right? Whether it's the eating only vegetables or just gaining this wisdom, right? Will you allow God to do that in your life as well? Daniel could have gone along with the rest of the trainees. He could have just done that, right? If he did it, he still would have lived. They wouldn't have killed him, right? Obviously, because they're like doing what he says, right? He would have been just like everybody else, all those other trainees. He would have lived. He would have lived very well, right? Because they really take care of those young men because they want them to be the best. And he would have still finished his training, and he still would have served Nebuchadnezzar. But going along with everyone else means that he probably would have ended up like everybody else, right? Like he wouldn't have had the wisdom and knowledge that exceeds everybody, that became noticeable to Nebuchadnezzar, right? He would have just been just like everyone else. And in a sense, Daniel wouldn't have experienced God's sovereignty in sustaining him and his friends. Like all these little things that we're seeing in the Bible, they're like, whoa, that's amazing. Like Daniel wouldn't have experienced that had he just done what everyone else did. And so the question is like, okay, yeah, will we be faithful in times of despair? And then will we allow, right? Because as we're faithful, we're going to be in situations where, that on a world level, it doesn't really make sense, right? But then we allow God to come into our lives and show his sovereignty, right? And I think we don't want to miss out on that. And I think we often do by just, okay, you know what? Let me do things my way. I think our natural human instinct is to, okay, what are the things I should do? Okay, I'm going to control this. I'm going to control this. And you know what, God, just like, thank you. Just stay out of it for a second. I got this. And a lot of times it does work out, right? Because, you guys here are like really responsible, smart people. And like you're going to make usually good decisions, right? And so it's going to work out for the most part. But sometimes we miss out on God being able to come into your life and doing something that is extraordinary, right? And Daniel, I bet if you talk to Daniel today, he would not say, like, oh yeah, I kind of didn't want that, life, like Daniel got to experience God's sovereignty throughout his whole life. And I think that's where I think a lot of us feel like being a Christian is kind of boring, because we say the prayer, right? Okay, God, I don't want to go to hell. It sounds really hot and humid down there, so I don't like that. So let me like do what I got to do to avoid that. Okay? Hey, I'm a Christian. Hooray! And then after that, we just, we got the membership card, right? So when we get to heaven, the door's there. We're going to pull out the membership like Costco. We're going to scan it, and it's going to show our face on the other side. Peter's going to be like, all right, you can go, right? And that's kind of how we treat our faith. And okay, that's a good thing, but man, the rest of our lives, our faith just feels really boring, right? Because we're thinking our faith in Jesus is about what happens later. But until then, I'm just kind of like, did I guess I'm just doing my thing, right? And so you have your goals, you have your dreams, and you do your best to achieve them, and God's not really in it, but he's like, but no, God is in my life, because at the end I've got the card, right? And then our faith is just like boring, and sometimes, most of the times what we do is we just say, I just don't want to think about that, and just kind of like put it to the side. And I hope you don't do that, but instead ask yourself, is this all there is to being a Christian? Right? Because it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be something that gives you joy. It's supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be like you're supposed to see God in your life. But it takes that decision to be faithful in times of despair, and also takes a decision to allow God to be sovereign in your life. Right? Because if you say, God, I'm just going to do my own thing, God loves you and honors and respects you, and he'd be like, okay, do your own thing. He's always there. He's not far, but it can be really boring, and that is not the life we want. Right? We want God to be sovereign in our lives every day, and we want to experience that. And so that's why I want to pray for you. And so let's pray.